Good morning, bonjour. Mon nom est Peggy Mason et je suis le vice-président de l'Institut Rideau. My name is Peggy Mason and I'm the vice president of the Rideau Institute. We are here to release a report on the significant safety implications of the single-engine F-35 for operation in Canada's Arctic and vast maritime regions. It is a joint project of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and the Rideau Institute. Bruce Campbell, the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, is here with us today, as is Michael Byers. Mr. Byers is a professor of political science at the University of British Columbia and Canada Research Chair in Global Politics and International Law. A prolific author and recent winner of the $50,000 Donner Prize for his book, International Law and the Arctic. The report to be released today is his latest in a series on Canadian military procurement. Le rapport est en anglais, mais le professeur Byers peut répondre à des questions en français. I would now like to turn the floor over to Professor Byers. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. As former Ambassador Mason has mentioned, I have released previous reports on military procurement, including on the subject of the F-35. Indeed, in April, I released a long report on the actual costs and the cost risks of F-35s. And so, although my report today is focused on a different issue, I have dealt with a broader range of issues and would be happy to deal with those in questions if you wished. This report was prompted by a question asked by a member of the National Press Gallery 4 years ago, when then Defense Minister Peter MacKay announced that Canada would be purchasing 65 F-35 strike fighters. You'll all remember Mr. MacKay sitting in a wooden mock-up of an F-35, making an announcement, and one of the journalists here in Ottawa asked what would happen to the pilot if an F-35 were to lose engine power over the Arctic. And Mr. MacKay replied, and I quote, "It won't." At the same time, there were reports in newspapers like the Globe and Mail of unnamed senior officials telling journalists that there was no statistical evidence that twin-engine fighter jets were any safer than single-engine fighter jets. Well, I've written this report today because those officials were wrong. There is, in fact, statistical evidence, and I believe it is important for Canadians to be aware that there is evidence that twin-engine fighter jets are, in fact, safer than single-engine fighter jets. And in the second largest country on Earth, with the longest coastline of any country, the need for a twin-engine fighter jet is very clear, and purchasing a single-engine fighter jet would be a serious mistake. Let me run through just a little bit of history. Canadians older than 45 or 50 will remember the CF-104 starfighter, nicknamed the Widowmaker. It was a single-engine fighter jet made by Lockheed Corporation, now Lockheed Martin. And Canada flew starfighters from 1961 to 1987. We never flew them in combat, yet we lost 110 starfighters in crashes. More importantly, we lost 39 Canadian pilots. These are non-combat crashes, many of them related to engine failure, and specifically 25% related to the ingestion of birds into the single engine. It was that tragic record of the single engine starfighter that led Canada to choose a twin-engine fighter jet as the replacement, the CF-18. And in my report, I document some of the statements with regards to that decision to purchase a twin-engine fighter jet. And let me just quote one person today. This is General Paul Manson, who was the head of Canada's procurement team. And he said, and I quote, "If you have a flameout while on patrol with the F-18, at least you can be sure of getting home on the other engine." The CF-18s have served us well with their twin engine. 2 years ago, NDP defense critic Jack Harris asked the Department of National Defense how often CF-18 pilots had shut down an engine in flight due to safety concerns. The response was on 228 occasions. Now, DND pointed out that some of these shutdowns were precautionary, and so not all 228 occasions would have led to a crash had there only been one engine on the plane. But it still is a timely reminder that when we're operating in this country with our incredibly large geography, that having a second engine does make a difference. And it's noteworthy here that the CF-18 does not have a pejorative nickname. It's not called the Widowmaker, or in the case of the F-16, a single-engine plane, the Lawn Dart. Airmen call the CF-18 by its official name, the Hornet. Just as interesting, I did a little bit of research looking for statistics related to differences between single-engine and twin-engine planes in terms of crash rates. And lo and behold, on the U.S. Air Force Safety Center website, I, in fact, found the statistics that defense officials in Canada said did not exist. Update it to March of 2014. And you can see these in my report, and it is clear that twin-engine planes have far fewer catastrophic accidents than single-engine planes. And I should also say that it is true that the reliability of jet engines has improved significantly over the decades, but the improvement in reliability does not detract from the fact that modern twin-engine fighter jets remain safer than single-engine fighter jets. There is a little bit of uncertainty as to the failure rate of some of the most modern single-engine fighter jets because they have not accumulated very many hours. And in this regard, I decided to take a look at very modern jet engines that accumulate a lot of hours, that use much of the same technology as fighter jet engines. And I chose the safest civilian aircraft in the world to look at, the Boeing 777, which has been flying for 20 years. There are approximately 1,000 of these aircraft in operation, in almost constant operation. And over 20 years, not a single death is attributed to the mechanical failure of a Boeing 777 engine. Now, why is that? Is it because the engines are perfectly reliable? No. Engines on Boeing 777s fail from time to time. And I document in my report how in the last 12 months, on 11 different occasions around the world, a Boeing 777 lost or had to shut down an engine. But Boeing 777s have two engines. And so these are not newsworthy incidents. But knowing that, is there anyone who would fly on a single-engine airliner across an ocean? Is there any responsible government that would certify a single-engine airliner to fly across an ocean? The answer is no. Well, I would suggest that we should be taking the same logic and applying it to the choice of fighter jets. A couple of other brief points to make before I open the floor to questions. And one is, and it's fairly obvious, that fighter jets do not glide very well. They have small wings, high wing loading. And unlike civilian jet aircraft, which occasionally can glide to safety, a fighter jet without engine power has to be either on final approach or very close to an airport to have any hope of landing safely if its only engine is lost. The United States has a relatively high population density. And although the United States is smaller geographically than Canada, it has roughly 10 times as many airports. Significantly, the United States does not use its F-16s off of aircraft carriers or in the Arctic, except close to the carriers or close to airports as mock enemy aircraft for dogfighting exercises. The mission over the ocean is done by the F-18 Super Hornet, a twin-engine plane, and the Arctic mission in Alaska is done by the F-22, a double-engine plane. In Canada, we have this vast geography. We have the longest coastline in the world. We have relatively few airports. A single-engine fighter jet that loses an engine or has to shut down an engine is in all likelihood not going to be able to reach an airport. A second point to make in this regard is that engine design is not the only determinant of engine reliability. And here I refer to an incident that occurred just a few years ago at Toronto Pearson Airport, Air Canada 777 Flight 001, which had an engine breakdown on takeoff, and it was later determined by the Transportation Safety Board that there was a fault in the manufacturing process. The engine itself was safely designed. Manufacturing, the process itself, there had been an error, followed up by mechanics overlooking visible damage during a regular inspection. So the engine on the F-35 could be safely designed, but that would not protect against engine fault. There will be no compromise if we have a single-engine fighter jet. No compromise possible on maintenance, on the sustainability of these aircraft. We will have to spend a great deal of attention to get absolutely everything right. And should I just say in this regard that the budget for maintenance of Canada's defense equipment has been cut back in the last couple of years. Last comment. If we were to purchase F-35s, and if we were to send our pilots over the oceans and into the Arctic with single-engine aircraft, knowing that there would be catastrophic accidents, that pilots would, in all likelihood, eject because their engine shut down, we would have to get to them quickly. Imagine a pilot who has to eject over the North Atlantic in winter, or a pilot who has to eject over Baffin Island in winter. We would have to get to them very quickly to rescue them before they froze to death. We do not have adequate search and rescue in this country as it stands today, and we would have grossly inadequate search and rescue if we were deploying single-engine fighter jets to those areas. So a last comment there related to the cost of F-35s. If we were to F-35s, the government would have to invest billions of dollars in creating world-class search and rescue anywhere that those planes would fly. And so to conclude, the single-engine versus twin-engine issue has not been resolved by improvements in the reliability of jet engines. Engine failures will still occur. And when they do so away from an airport, a second engine is the only thing that can prevent a crash. The issue is particularly important for Canada, which again has the longest coastline in the world and vast Arctic territories. As one former CF-18 pilot told Frontline Defense magazine in May 2011, and I'm quoting here, "A single engine is stupid. There's no backup. If it fails, you're dead." End quote. Happy to take any questions.
Le problème avec le 35, le fait qu'il y ait seulement un moteur, c'est quoi le problème? C'est quoi les problématiques? C'est quoi les dangers avec ce moteur?
Le danger, c'est que c'est impossible de construire un moteur avec une opération parfaite. Même aujourd'hui, avec la technologie eau, les moteurs vont avoir des problèmes des fois, et avec seulement un moteur, un problème dans l'Arctique, créer une situation très dangereuse pour le pilote. Et au Canada, maintenant, nous avons un choix. Protéger les pilotes par acheter des avions avec deux moteurs ou créer un risque énorme pour les pilotes qui sont là pour protéger le Canada et qui ont le droit d'avoir un avion suffisant pour le travail.
Vous dites que ça coûte plus cher, là, vous dites que ces avions-là pourraient être potentiellement dangereux pour les pilotes. Comment pouvez-vous expliquer l'entêtement du gouvernement à vouloir aller de l'avant encore avec ça?
Je ne sais pas l'entente de gouvernement, mais je vois que les pilotes ne sont pas la priorité du gouvernement. C'est bien évident. Il y a un choix pour protéger les pilotes avec des avions qui sont aussi capables avec deux moteurs, et ils pensent à acheter le F-35 avec seulement un.
Mr. Byers, do you believe that the F-35 is the aircraft of choice by DND? You know, we've heard former CDS, wax eloquently about it. And do we know what current pilots think about this? Give me a sense of that.
Part of the frustration of researching in this field is that the government analysis is not public. So, for instance, we know there is an options analysis that was prepared by the Royal Canadian Air Force over the last 2 years that is now in the hands of the government. It is complete, but not public. I would hope that an analysis is there of the single versus twin engine issue, but I can't tell you whether it is or is not. I do know that then Defense Minister Peter MacKay, 4 years ago, announced the government's intent to purchase F-35s, and the government only hit the pause button on the procurement because of the Auditor General exposing the greatly elevated costs of the procurement, some 3 or 4 times higher than what the government had told the Canadian public. So the answer to your question is, I don't know. I fear that the government is about to make a decision to procure the F-35 without all of the information in front of it, or if it does have the information, that is, it is willfully choosing to ignore some of it.
Is buying the F-35 a mistake for Canada, and is it a mistake for the U.S. military to buy it?
Thank you for that question. The United States has less risk associated with the safety issue of a single engine jet, and let me explain why. First of all, the United States has a much higher density of airports, 10 times as many airports as Canada, with a smaller landmass than Canada. So far more options to do a steep glide, to land an F-35 if the engine were to burn out. Just as importantly, both the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy have other planes. So the Navy has F-18 Super Hornets to operate some distance from its aircraft carriers, where perhaps an F-35 would be at risk because of its single engine. They have a twin-engine modern plane. The U.S. Air Force has the F-22, And there is a quote in my report from the head of Air Combat Command stating explicitly that the F-35 needs the F-22 to provide air cover. So the United States has hedged its bets by having different kinds of aircraft. The government of Canada, certainly 4 years ago and perhaps today, is committed to a single type of aircraft for a country that does not have as many airports. The other thing to add here is note where the United States bases many of its F-22s, in Alaska. The F-35s will not be based in Alaska because a single-engine plane is inappropriate for the Arctic. The United States Air Force has decided that.
You said there's no compromise on the maintenance of the F-35. It's a single-engine plane. So given the cost estimates you've seen from the government on the maintenance, how much more would there have to be added to the maintenance cost of the F-35 to reach the level of maintenance you think is necessary to keep the plane in the air?
I would refer you to my report from late April entitled "The Plane That Ate the Canadian Military." And using U.S. Air Force numbers, I determined that the operation and sustainment cost of the F-35 would be approximately 1.5 times that of the CF-18s. Okay? And the CF-18s require a lot of maintenance because they're almost 30 years old. So the numbers on operating costs and sustainment costs are significantly higher for the F-35. And if we were to purchase F-35s, I would want the government to spend all that was necessary to maintain those engines as best they possibly could, because the safety of our pilots would be at risk.
You're referring to the CF-18 maintenance costs. I'm talking about the maintenance costs that were put out for the F-35. How much more would be necessary? Are their estimates off?
Well, the government,
trying to suggest?
The government's estimates are off, and I document this. I have hard numbers from the U.S. government on, for instance, the operating cost of the F-18 Super Hornet and the F-35. The F-35 is twice that of the F-18 Super Hornet, both new planes. So that is in my report. In fact, I document how the Auditor General in 2012 made the mistaken assumption that the operating and sustainment cost of the F-35 would be the equivalent of the CF-18. That was a misplaced assumption, and it actually left $11 billion out of the $45 billion price tag that the Auditor General identified. In terms of actual cost, in my report from April, I identified that we are now at $56 billion. That is before the cost risks, things like increases in inflation, changes in the price of aviation fuel, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking about an extraordinarily expensive procurement here. But my report today is about a different issue, which is the appropriateness or inappropriateness of a single-engine fighter jet for the second largest country in the world, with the longest coastlines of any country in the world, a low population density, a relatively small number of airports. The U.S. Navy insisted on buying F-18 Super Hornets in parallel with the F-35. The Air Force, U.S. Air Force, insists on deploying twin-engine fighter jets to Alaska. There's a message in that for Canada.
Clear as well. All the other options being looked at right now, they're all twin-engine planes? Or are there other single-engine planes that are under consideration right now?
There were 4 different aircraft considered in the options analysis produced by the Royal Canadian Air Force. The F-35 is the only single-engine jet among the 4. One more thing to say, and this might be a little bit provocative. The Prime Minister is expressing considerable concern about Russia today. And of course, Russia is our neighbor to the north. If the Prime Minister is serious about his concerns with regards to Russia, I would hope that he would decide to buy fighter jet aircraft that are suitable for operation in the Arctic. There's some serious contradictions here. Pushing forward, it seems, on the purchase of a single-engine jet while identifying threats that are located to the north of us in that vast remote area without airports.
On the topic of other countries, you ended up mentioning within the report Norway, and you also ended up mentioning Alaska as both sort of comparable but not comparable. Are there other countries that you could end up saying, well, this is comparable maybe to or comparable to what we see within Canada, at least for our north and how our geography and weather ends up?
Mm-hmm. Well, the best example is Alaska, and the choice made by the U.S. Air Force to base a substantial portion of its F-22 fleet there, twin-engine aircraft for the Arctic. As I explained in the report, the situation in Norway is a bit different. I've been to Norway a number of times. It actually has quite a temperate climate because of the Gulf Stream. It has excellent infrastructure. It has paved runways as far north as 78 degrees, which is about the same distance north as the north end of Ellesmere Island. Paved runways, and much better search and rescue than Canada. And then recall as well that Norway is a relatively small country compared to this vast country of ours.
Geography as being an issue before in the past when it comes to Canada, and basically issues with landing to and from different sort of airports. How much of a difference would it make in terms of the actual landing, having a twin versus a single engine?
Well, the math is very simple. If you lose an engine on a twin-engine jet, you can still fly the jet. That would, in the vast majority of circumstances, get you to an airport. With a single-engine jet, you lose the engine, and you're essentially flying a brick. Again, I'm just telling you, facts based on research. I'm giving you quotes from, among others, General Manson, who headed up the procurement of the CF-18. We got the decision right in 1980. And we made that decision because of the tragic record of the CF-104 starfighter. 39 pilots lost. We learned that lesson in 1980. And it seems now that the government may be forgetting that lesson. And I would not want the F-35 to be Canada's next widowmaker.
You said just earlier that its importance for Canadians should be concerned, but there might be some Canadians that say, how or why would the government put the safety of our pilots in the purchase of the F-35s?
Listen, the only argument in favor of a single-engine fighter jet would be that having a single engine delivers better performance. Okay, that would be the only argument. And the argument can be made that the F-16 delivered phenomenal dogfighting performance because of its small single-engine character. But the performance of the F-35 is actually very weak compared to competitor aircraft, right? It's very slow. It's not maneuverable. It has limited range. It can't carry very many munitions. The only thing that is an argument in favor of it is the limited radar profile, which many people think could be taken away as an advantage by developments in radar technology in places like Russia and China. It's a slow, limited plane. So the argument that you make a sacrifice in terms of greater risk to pilots in order to get that extra performance simply doesn't hold true in this instance. And again, if you're the, let's say, U.S. Air Force, you can say, well, we'll lose some planes, but the pilot can eject and we'll rescue him. Well, can we here in Canada rescue pilots who have to eject over Baffin Island? The answer is that the situation is fundamentally different. We don't have the search and rescue to rescue our